Ever felt like a stranger at your own kitchen table?
Picture this moment unfolding in our modest dining room in suburban Cleveland on that fateful Thanksgiving, where the rich aroma of roasted turkey mingled seamlessly with the undercurrent of long-buried family resentments that had simmered for decades beneath the surface of our everyday interactions. And as my father, Robert Harper, cleared his throat with the deliberate gravity of a man about to alter the course of our lives forever, I could sense the impending explosion that would redefine everything I had worked so tirelessly to build in the shadows of their indifference. I am Emily Harper, the 42-year-old middle child who had dedicated countless sleepless nights to sustaining Harper Manufacturing, our family's mid-sized enterprise that produced essential industrial tools like wrenches and hammers for factories stretching across the Midwest, embodying the very essence of American grit and determination that my father had instilled in us all during those formative years when he bootstrapped the company from a single garage in the 70s amid economic hardships that tested every fiber of his unyielding resolve. Yet, despite my contributions ranging from overhauling outdated supply chains to negotiating crucial contracts that kept the doors open while revenues dipped, my role had always been minimized, overshadowed by the preferential treatment afforded to my brother Jack, who at 45 carried himself with the effortless entitlement of the favored son, more inclined to schmooze on golf courses than to delve into the nitty-gritty operational details that I handled with precision and foresight. As we gathered around the table that evening, the clatter of silverware against plates providing a rhythmic backdrop to the superficial pleasantries exchanged over Mom's meticulously prepared sides of cranberry sauce and mashed potatoes, Jack positioned himself at the head like a self-appointed king surveying his domain, his laughter already laced with that mocking edge that had become all too familiar whenever discussions turned to the business's future, while my younger sister Lisa, 39 and perpetually distracted by the glow of her smartphone screen hidden just below the table's edge, contributed her share of snide asides that masked a deeper complicity in the family's dismissive dynamics toward me. Mom, ever the peacemaker at 65, moved gracefully between the kitchen and the dining area with the gravy boat in hand, her subtle glances in my direction conveying a silent sympathy that she dared not voice aloud for fear of disrupting the fragile harmony Dad demanded. During these holiday rituals, which always included a perfunctory grace where he thanked the heavens not just for the meal, but for the legacy of Harper Manufacturing that had provided for us through booms and busts alike. It was in this charged atmosphere, as the steam from the carved turkey wafted upward and curled around the faces of those I had called family for over 4 decades, that Dad set down his fork with a resounding clink that cut through the chatter like a blade. His voice emerging gravelly and authoritative from years spent barking orders over the relentless din of factory machinery, announcing with uncharacteristic finality that the business we had all poured our lives into was being relinquished entirely, a decision that left me reeling not from surprise, but from the cold finality of his exclusionary phrasing when he added that I, specifically, was being cut out of any involvement moving forward. Jack leaned forward eagerly, his eyes gleaming with opportunistic interest as he probed for details about the prospective buyer, his posture radiating the confidence of someone who had long assumed the company's reins would one day fall squarely into his lap without the need for genuine effort, while Lisa's burst of laughter echoed sharply off the walls, her hand flying to her mouth in mock surprise as she turned to me with that condescending gleam and remarked on how I would now be relegated to my supposed little consulting gigs, a jab that twisted the knife deeper given how those very gigs had been my covert lifeline in building something far more substantial than they could ever imagine. The heat flushed my cheeks as their combined mirth swelled around me like an suffocating wave. Memories flooding back of the innumerable late nights I had spent poring over financial statements in the dimly lit office, while Jack squandered opportunities on ill-advised ventures and Lisa siphoned resources for her extravagant, professional development escapades, all of which I had documented meticulously in preparation for the moment when their complacency would finally catch up to them in ways they least expected. Yet, I maintained my composure, my fork moving deliberately through a slice of turkey as if dissecting their fragile egos with each cut, and when I posed the question about the identity of the buyer with a calm that belied the storm raging inside me, Dad responded matter-of-factly that it was Northcrest Partners, a Chicago-based firm extending an offer of $36 million for a clean and decisive handover, his tone carrying a smug satisfaction that only amplified the sting of betrayal. As the conversation lurched forward amid their renewed peals of laughter, with Jack mimicking my earlier pleas for modernization in a high-pitched caricature that drew even Mom's reluctant chuckle, I excused myself under the pretense of assisting in the kitchen, the weight of my smartphone buzzing insistently in my pocket serving as a stark reminder of the parallel life I had constructed far from their scrutiny, a text from my trusted assistant confirming that the deal papers for Northcrest were primed and unassailable, ready to execute with the precision of a well-orchestrated coup. Leaning over the sink as warm water cascaded over the accumulating dishes, I allowed a subtle smirk to form, the irony of their obliviousness washing over me like the suds. They believed me discarded and defeated. Yet I was the architect of their impending upheaval, the silent force poised to reclaim what should have been mine through intellect and perseverance rather than birthright alone. That evening, as I retreated to the familiar confines of my childhood bedroom with its faded posters and creaky floorboards, the ceiling above me becoming a canvas for replaying the dinner's humiliations, I grappled with the ethical contours of my strategy, wondering whether the satisfaction of their eventual astonishment would outweigh the irreparable fractures it might inflict on the bonds that, despite everything, still tethered me to this dysfunctional clan. In the quiet hours that followed, another vibration pierced the stillness, a suspicious idling of Lisa's car outside the window, her silhouette visible in the driveway long after she should have been settled, hinting at secrets of her own that could unravel further threads in this tapestry of deception, leaving me to ponder if the morrow's revelations would force my hand sooner than planned or allow the suspense to build to its exquisite peak. The days preceding that explosive Thanksgiving dinner had unfolded like a meticulously scripted drama in which I, Emily Harper, played the role of the overlooked understudy, while my family members strutted across the stage as if they owned every spotlight and curtain call, their complacency rooted in years of unearned privileges that allowed them to ignore the structural cracks I alone had been shoring up in Harper Manufacturing through exhaustive analyses of market trends and innovative proposals for digital integration that Dad dismissed as impractical distractions from the hands-on traditions he held sacred. A full week before the holiday chaos erupted, I had returned to the family home under the pretext of offering one final round of assistance in organizing the company's archived records, a task that granted me unrestricted access to the dusty filing cabinets in the back office of our Cleveland facility, where the air still carried the faint metallic tang of machined steel and the ghosts of overtime shifts I had pulled during economic downturns when Jack preferred to delegate the heavy lifting to underlings while he networked at overpriced industry events that yielded little more than hangovers and hollow connections. It was during one such afternoon, sunlight filtering through grimy windows onto stacks of yellowed invoices that chronicled decades of modest successes and near misses, that I encountered Jack rummaging furtively through Dad's private drawer, his broad shoulders hunched in a manner that betrayed the desperation of a man cornered by his own mounting indiscretions, prompting me to lean casually against the doorframe with an armful of financial reports and inquire with feigned nonchalance whether he was searching for a particular document or merely indulging in some nostalgic perusal of the business's foundational paperwork. His startled reaction sent a flurry of papers fluttering to the floor like startled birds, revealing glimpses of crumpled receipts and coded notes that hinted at the gambling debts he had concealed so poorly within the company's expense reimbursements. Those late-night poker sessions in dimly lit Detroit casinos disguised as essential client outreach that had quietly eroded our profit margins by thousands over the past several quarters alone. We engaged in a heated exchange right there amid the clutter, with him accusing me of invading his privacy and overstepping my diminishing role in the enterprise, while I countered with irrefutable evidence drawn from the very ledgers I had been reviewing. pointing out how his so-called networking dinners had ballooned to 20 grand in the last fiscal period without corresponding revenue gains, a discrepancy that raised red flags not just for me but potentially for any incoming buyer. Scrutinizing the books during due diligence. Although he attempted to brush it off with his trademark bluster and a forced laugh that echoed hollowly off the concrete walls, I detected the underlying flicker of genuine alarm in his eyes, a vulnerability that emboldened me to take a calculated step toward retribution by later that evening composing an anonymous email to our long-standing accountant framed as a concerned whistleblower report on observed irregularities in the accounts payable section, ensuring that the message contained just enough detail to trigger a preliminary review without directly implicating myself as the source. This initial act of clever reprisal brought a fleeting sense of vindication, watching over the subsequent days as Jack received the innocuous yet probing call from the accounting department requesting clarification on certain line items, an interaction that visibly rattled him and led to the abrupt cancellation of his planned golf outing with influential suppliers, thereby disrupting his carefully curated facade of invincibility and forcing him to confront the precariousness of his position within the family hierarchy for the first time in years. Yet, intertwined with that satisfaction was an undercurrent of unease, a nagging introspection about whether I was mirroring the very manipulative tendencies I resented in them by operating from the shadows rather than confronting issues head-on. A moral quandary that intensified as I turned my attention to Lisa, whose elusive behaviors had long puzzled me and now demanded closer examination given her propensity for portraying herself as the beleaguered outsider when in reality, she benefited from the same gendered leniencies that marginalized my contributions. She had swept into the factory that same week under the guise of contributing to a marketing brainstorm session, though her ideas rarely extended beyond superficial social media campaigns that prioritized aesthetics over substance. And it was during a lull in the conference room discussion that I overheard her murmuring urgently into her phone about the impending payout from the business sale and the intricacies of dividing it among the three siblings in a manner that explicitly sidelined me. Her voice laced with a conspiratorial tone that confirmed my suspicions of a premeditated alliance between her and Jack aimed at securing their financial futures at my expense. Rather than exploding in accusation, which would have alerted the others prematurely, I opted for a subtler form of witty retaliation by deliberately forwarding an archived email thread to her supervisor at the marketing firm in Columbus, one in which she had vented frustrations about Harper's outdated products in a public forum disguised as professional critique, an action that prompted a flurry of panicked text messages from her that evening pleading for intervention and explanations, too, which I responded with a single ambiguous emoji-free reply suggesting it might have been a technical glitch, while inwardly reveling in the poetic justice of her temporary professional setback. Dad remained the enigmatic centerpiece of this familial web, his 68-year-old frame still commanding the workshop floor with the authoritative stride of a patriarch who viewed the company as an extension of his identity, forged in the fires of post-war optimism and sustained through sheer willpower yet. His repeated rebuffs of my strategic visions, labeling them as frivolous pursuits better suited to domestic hobbies like baking the pies that symbolized my supposed place, had ultimately propelled me to depart a decade earlier and establish Northcrest Partners in the bustling anonymity of Chicago's financial district, where I transformed skepticism from venture capitalists into substantial backing for a firm now specializing in targeted acquisitions of undervalued manufacturing entities like our own. As the holiday approached, the household atmosphere thickened with artificial festivity, Mom adorning the living room with twinkling lights in a bid to mask the underlying tensions while Dad grumbled about the logistical hurdles of the impending transaction. And I maintained my facade of reluctant acceptance, though my thoughts churned with projections and contingencies outlined in the notebook I kept concealed. A near miss occurred when Jack stumbled upon that very notebook during a casual sweep of the office, his teasing remark about my daydreams of corporate glory carrying an undercurrent of unease as he flipped through pages marked with Northcrest branding, a subtle clue that planted seeds of doubt without fully illuminating the truth. That revelation lingered into the evening meal of reheated lasagna, where Dad drew me aside afterward with an uncharacteristic warmth, expressing pride in my resilience amid the changes, a sentiment that momentarily softened my resolve and compelled me to reassess the human cost of my meticulously laid plans. However, as I prepared to depart for Chicago the following day, my phone illuminated with a voicemail from an unidentified caller bearing an uncanny resemblance to Lisa's inflection. Her words tumbling out in evident distress about the risks of discovery regarding undisclosed loans tied to the business. A disclosure that hinted at deeper entanglements waiting to surface and potentially alter the trajectory of my revenge just as the Thanksgiving gathering loomed on the horizon. Thanksgiving Eve descended upon our Cleveland home with an oppressive chill that seeped through the cracks in the old wooden frame of the house, mirroring the escalating undercurrents of suspicion and resentment that had begun to erode the foundations of our family interactions ever since the whispers of the business sale started circulating like unchecked rumors in a small-town diner, and as I, Emily Harper, maneuvered through the crowded living room where the flickering light of the television cast elongated shadows over the faces of those who had long taken my loyalty for granted. I could feel the weight of my concealed agenda pressing against the facade of normalcy I struggled to maintain amid the forced camaraderie of pre-holiday rituals that masked deeper divisions. Having driven back from Chicago that very morning with my briefcase stowed securely beneath the passenger seat, its contents brimming with the finalized acquisition documents for Northcrest partners that outlined every clause designed to safeguard my interests while exposing the vulnerabilities in Harper Manufacturing's operations, I settled onto the worn couch beside Mom, who was absently folding napkins into festive shapes, her 65-year-old hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades smoothing over the rough edges of our household dynamics without ever demanding acknowledgement for her quiet endurance. Jack nursed his beer with deliberate slowness, his 45-year-old frame slouched in the armchair as if to project an air of unassailable ease. Though the subtle tick in his jaw betrayed the lingering anxiety from the audit inquiry I had indirectly provoked through that anonymous tip, a development that had already compelled him to reschedule his weekend golf escapades with key suppliers and left him casting sidelong glances in my direction that oscillated between accusation and unease. I broke the ice with a casual remark about his evidently rough week, the words laced with just enough feigned concern to elicit a grumbled retort about overzealous family members meddling in affairs beyond their scope. To which I responded with a measured smile that concealed the inner triumph of witnessing his carefully constructed persona begin to fray at the seams. A small but satisfying act of retribution that echoed the broader pattern of comeuppance I envisioned unfolding over the coming days, without yet revealing the full extent of my orchestration. Lisa's arrival later that evening injected a fresh layer of tension into the atmosphere, her 39-year-old features drawn and her eyes rimmed with the telltale redness of recent distress as she enveloped me in an embrace that lingered a fraction too long. Her whispered gratitude for my supposed innocence in the email fiasco ringing false against the backdrop of her earlier pleas for assistance, a deception that only deepened my resolve to navigate this minefield with calculated precision, rather than impulsive confrontation. The atmosphere shifted palpably during the impromptu family meeting Dad convened in the kitchen as the sense of simmering stuffing and baking pies began to permeate the air, his commanding presence at the center island drawing us all into a semicircle around the scattered paperwork that represented the tangible end of an era for Harper Manufacturing, where he announced with resolute finality that the deal with Northcrest Partners would be formally signed the following day, emphasizing the firm's impeccable credentials as verified through his own thorough vetting process that had overlooked the intricate web of personal entanglements woven by his other children. Jack responded with an enthusiastic high five that reverberated through the tiled space, his enthusiasm a stark contrast to the hollow ring in Lisa's supportive murmur about bidding farewell to the relentless demands of the operation. Her comment directed at me with a pitying undertone that ignited a spark of indignation within me, prompting a lighthearted yet pointed riposte about potentially acquiring a tool enterprise of my own someday, a statement that elicited chuckles from the group but carried an undercurrent of prescience they failed to grasp amid their oblivious confidence. Dessert brought the evening's simmering pot to a near boil when Jack's phone shattered the relative calm with its insistent ring, pulling him into the adjacent hallway where his voice escalated in pitch as he demanded explanations for a major supplier's sudden withdrawal from a pending contract, an outcome directly attributable to the discreet inquiries I had initiated earlier in the week, a twist of fate that left me suppressing a grin behind my spoonful of pie a la mode while the room buzzed with speculation about the sale's potential complications. Lisa's own device soon joined the fray, her expression draining of color as she absorbed news from the bank regarding scrutiny over the personal loans she and Jack had surreptitiously secured against the company's assets. A revelation that prompted Dad's head to snap up in bewildered demand for clarification, his gravelly tone cutting through her stammered excuses about clerical errors and misunderstandings that barely masked the depth of their collusion. As we transitioned to clearing the table amid the lingering haze of unspoken accusations, Dad drew me into the dimly lit den for a private word, his usually stern demeanor softening into something resembling paternal vulnerability as he acknowledged the pain this transition must be causing me and sought affirmation that I comprehended the necessity of severing ties with the faltering enterprise. A moment of rare intimacy that momentarily pierced my armor of determination and forced me to confront the emotional toll of my path, wondering if the pursuit of vindication justified the isolation it imposed on relationships forged over a lifetime of shared hardships. The fragile truce shattered when Jack stormed in, his finger jabbing accusatorily as he alleged my involvement in the supplier debacle, igniting a cacophony of raised voices that Mom attempted to quell with pleas for unity. Yet I held my ground with a witty deflection attributing the mishaps to the universe's impeccable sense of timing, a quip that diffused the immediate hostility but left the air charged with unresolved grievances. Retreating to the guest room that night, the walls seeming to close in with the weight of uncertainty about whether to accelerate my disclosure in the face of these unraveling secrets or allow the drama to crest naturally at the dinner table, I wrestled with the dilemmas posed by the partial truths emerging from my siblings' missteps, each one chipping away at the narrative of family solidarity they had clung to for so long. A soft knock at the door interrupted my reverie, revealing Lisa on the threshold with tears tracing paths down her cheeks, her voice trembling as she insisted we needed to discuss the situation in depth because the reality of their financial maneuvers was far more convoluted than initial appearances suggested, a confession that dangled like a precarious thread, poised to either mend or sever the already frayed connections as the holiday meal awaited just hours away. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived shrouded in a gray pallor that seemed to seep from the overcast Ohio sky into the very marrow of our family home, amplifying the chill that had settled over our interactions following Lisa's tearful midnight confession, which revealed not just the extent of the loans she and Jack had entangled with the business's collateral, but also the calculated exclusion they had plotted against me in anticipation of the inheritance windfall, a betrayal that twisted like a knife in my gut even as it solidified my determination to proceed with the Northcrest acquisition on terms that would force them to reckon with their short-sighted greed. I, Emily Harper, had barely closed my eyes during the restless hours in the guest room, my mind replaying the nuances of her words, how Jack had convinced her that sidelining the unreliable middle sister was a prudent safeguard for their futures. A rationale that exposed the rotten core of our sibling dynamics where loyalty was doled out selectively based on convenience rather than merit, leaving me to question in the dim pre-dawn light whether my own secrecy mirrored their duplicity or elevated it through the lens of justified self-preservation. Emerging into the kitchen where the aroma of Dad's signature pancakes sizzled on the griddle, mingling with the bitter undertone of fresh coffee that Jack clutched like a lifeline, I observed his slumped posture at the breakfast nook, his face etched with the remnants of humiliation from the previous evening's supplier fallout, a direct consequence of my strategic interventions that had now compounded with the financial scrutiny bearing down on his concealed vices. Dad moved about with his usual stoic efficiency at 68, flipping the batter with practiced flips that belied the internal turmoil I sensed brewing beneath his gruff exterior. While Mom bustled in the background setting out syrup and butter in a bid to inject normalcy into the proceedings, her fleeting looks toward me carrying a plea for restraint amid the palpable undercurrents of discord. Jack's muttered complaints about the latest round of family-induced headaches prompted me to interject with a casual query about his plans for the day, the phrasing infused with just enough faux sympathy to elicit a sharp retort about minding one's own business. A deflection that only heightened my amusement at the irony of his predicament, since the very audits nipping at his heels stemmed from the seeds I had sown so deftly. My next maneuver in this escalating game of retribution unfolded serendipitously during the preparations to load the car for the brief drive to Grandma's. The gathering was at our house after all, but the ritual of gathering outerwear in the garage provided the perfect cover, as I discovered an old flash drive tucked among the toolboxes, its label scrawled with Jack's confidential deals. In his own hurried script, and with a theatrical air of curiosity, I inserted it into the family laptop connected to the living room television under the pretense of checking a recipe video, the screen suddenly projecting a cascade of incriminating receipts, detailing his poker debts funneled through company reimbursements, each entry a damning testament to years of fiscal irresponsibility that now hung exposed for all to see. Dad's jaw tightened visibly as the figures scrolled by, his demand for explanation slicing through the stunned silence like a cold wind, while Lisa's sharp intake of breath betrayed her complicity, though a fleeting smirk crossed her lips at the sight of Jack's downfall. A shared moment of schadenfreude that underscored the fractures within their alliance and provided me with the witty satisfaction of declaring it an accidental heirloom reveal, with a shrug that masked the precision of my staging. The ensuing car ride to pick up last-minute supplies from the market devolved into a taut void of unspoken accusations, the engine's hum the only sound as Jack gripped the wheel with white-knuckled intensity and Lisa stared out the window. Her earlier vulnerability evaporated into defensiveness, leaving me in the back seat to contemplate the ethical tightrope I walked had this escalation crossed into cruelty. Or was it the necessary catalyst to dismantle their illusions before the main event? Back home, as the turkey began its slow roast in the oven, filling the air with savory promises that contrasted sharply with the acrid tension, Mom attempted to steer conversations toward neutral topics like neighborhood gossip and holiday traditions. But Dad inexorably circled back to the business transaction, his voice carrying a note of finality as he mentioned a confirmatory call from Northcrest partners that afternoon, the details of which I monitored discreetly on my phone where my assistant relayed seamless progress on the wire transfer protocols. A subtle clue nearly unraveled the veil when Lisa glanced at my screen during a momentary lapse, her eyes narrowing at the familiar Northcrest logo emblazoned across an incoming notification. Her hesitant query about its familiarity drawing Jack's defensive barrage about what other secrets I might be harboring in my side distractions. A probe that forced me to parry with a humorous quip about it being merely an app for tracking coffee loyalty points, though the seed of suspicion had been planted deeper now, germinating amid the dilemmas swirling in my thoughts about the optimal timing for my disclosure. Should I preempt the signing to seize control outright, or permit the ceremony to unfold and amplify the shock value? The conflict intensified over the pre-meal appetizers arranged on the sideboard, where Dad raised a glass in premature celebration of the $36 million influx that would redistribute our family's fortunes, Jack and Lisa joining with toasts that rang increasingly hollow in light of their exposures, and it was in that charged interlude that a twist materialized through a speakerphone call from one of Dad's longtime associates, the man's jovial congratulations to the Harper offspring on the lucrative handover inadvertently slipping in a reference to Emily's impressive firm leading the charge, a phrase that hung ambiguously in the air and ignited a flurry of confused demands from Jack for elaboration on this enigmatic connection. Mom's worried sidelong glance toward me amplified the internal tug-of-war, her silent appeal highlighting the disagreeable isolation my choices had wrought. As I deflected the mounting inquiries with another layer of levity by suggesting it was probably a mix-up with some distant cousin's venture, but the undercurrent of doubt now pulsed stronger. compelling me to weigh the risks of premature revelation against the allure of the full dramatic unveiling. As we finally assembled at the dining table, the grace concluding in a murmur of half-hearted amens, Dad cleared his throat once more with that familiar authoritative rumble, his eyes sweeping the group as he prefaced his next statement with the words, "One more thing before we dig in." The pause that followed stretching like an eternity and suspending us all on the precipice of whatever unforeseen disclosure he was about to unleash, a moment that threatened to either accelerate my hand or irrevocably alter the script I had so carefully authored. The dining room transformed into a tableau of suspended anticipation as Dad's prefatory words, "One more thing before we dig in," hung in the air like the steam rising from the perfectly browned turkey at the table's center, drawing every pair of eyes toward him in a collective breath hold that encapsulated the culmination of weeks, if not years, of simmering grievances and unspoken power plays within the Harper family, where I, Emily Harper, sat poised with my napkin unfolded in my lap, the concealed weight of my smartphone against my thigh serving as a talisman of the impending upheaval I had engineered through Northcrest Partners' meticulously crafted acquisition strategy. At 68, Dad commanded the head of the table with his silvered hair catching the warm glow of the overhead light, his gravelly voice steady as he proposed a toast to fresh starts and the $36 million infusion from the sale that would ostensibly liberate us from the burdens of Harper Manufacturing's declining fortunes, a gesture that Jack mirrored with a raised glass despite the pallor lingering on his 45-year-old face from the morning's financial exposures, while Lisa at 39 joined in with a mechanical clink that failed to mask the wariness in her posture following her confessional vulnerability the night before. Mom, ever the anchor at 65, lifted her water glass with a tentative smile that did little to dispel the undercurrents of discord rippling through the room, her eyes flickering toward me in a silent entreaty for composure amid the fragility of this holiday facade. Yet as the glasses settled back onto the linen, Dad turned his gaze directly to me with an almost paternal softness that caught me off guard, acknowledging the sting of my exclusion from the business's handover while affirming that my place in the family lineage remained unshakable, a sentiment that pierced through my resolve and evoked a fleeting pang of regret for the walls I had erected in secrecy, choices that now struck me as profoundly isolating in their self-reliant severity, potentially alienating the very connections worth salvaging even as they propelled me toward vindication. Jack's snide murmur about toasting to my reinventing phase and Lisa's accompanying titter sliced through the momentary tenderness, like shards of glass, reigniting the fire of accumulated slights from my years of toiling over balance sheets and innovation pitches dismissed as feminine whims, prompting me to set my glass down with deliberate calm and pose the question once more about the buyer's identity, my tone laced with an undercurrent of inevitability that Dad met with his reaffirmation of Northcrest Partners as the reliable Chicago entity poised to inject new life into the enterprise. Leaning forward amid the expectant hush, I allowed a subtle smile to curve my lips as I delivered the revelation that shattered the illusion. "That's me, Dad," the words landing with the precision of a gavel in a courtroom of familial betrayals, instantly freezing the room in a tableau of stunned disbelief, where Jack's glass teetered precariously on the table's edge before spilling crimson wine across the white cloth like an omen of spilled secrets, Lisa's eyes widening in a mix of horror and dawning comprehension, and Mom's soft gasp echoing the collective intake of breath that followed. Dad blinked rapidly, his confusion morphing into furrowed bewilderment as he demanded elaboration, at which point I slid my phone across the polished surface to display the irrefutable acquisition confirmation bearing my signature at the forefront, detailing how I had founded Northcrest 5 years prior in the anonymity of Chicago's skyline, transforming initial doubts from investors into a formidable firm specializing in revitalizing overlooked manufacturing assets, such as our own, every bid and projection a testament to the intellect and endurance they had undervalued for so long. Chaos erupted in waves, Jack sputtering denials of impossibility and accusations of elaborate bluffing, his voice cracking under the strain of his own unraveling deceptions, while Lisa whispered hoarsely about the loans now ensnared in my audit clauses, her earlier confession paling against the reality of clauses that would scrutinize and potentially reclaim those ill-gotten leverages. In that maelstrom, my final strand of retribution wove through with calculated wit as I outlined the terms of the deal, not outright demolition, but a structured retention of the Harper name, the majority of jobs, and a pathway for redemption where Jack and Lisa could petition for roles contingent on demonstrated merit rather than entitlement, a framework that positioned me as the steward of their legacy while stripping away the unearned privileges they had clung to, prompting Dad's face to crumple in a complex brew of regret and reluctant admiration as he pressed for why I had concealed such prowess, to which I replied with a humorous edge that questioned whether he would have heeded a daughter's ambitions or relegated them to the realm of pie recipes alongside my other domestic talents. Mom reached tentatively for my hand across the table, her touch a bridge toward possible reconciliation, but I hesitated in reciprocation, the fracture of trust manifesting in that brief withdrawal, a disagreeable choice born of self-protection that now echoed hollowly in the room, underscoring the isolation my path had demanded and inviting introspection on whether victory came at the expense of the familial warmth holidays ostensibly celebrated. A final twist unfurled through Dad's halting admission that he had harbored faint suspicions about my involvement, having orchestrated the sale in part as a deliberate test of my mettle amid the business's woes. A confession that Jack bitterly contested by blurting out his own long-buried sabotage of my early career pitches out of envious fear that my rising competence would eclipse his favored status. A disclosure that hung heavy and transformed the air from shock to somber reckoning. As slices of pie circulated amid the subdued clatter of forks, the weight of dilemmas pressed upon us all. Would Dad muster a genuine apology to mend the patriarchal rifts, or retreat into prideful denial? Might Jack and Lisa slink away into obscurity, or rally for atonement through earnest effort? And for me, did this triumph over the Tool empire heal the scars of dismissal, or merely widen them into irreparable chasms? The table fell into a profound quiet, futures left tantalizingly ambiguous as the remnants of the feast cooled, compelling each of us to confront whether $36 million could purchase absolution or if the true cost of unearthed truths would echo unresolved through the holidays yet to come.